Today is September the 16th, 2021. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and along with me is Stan Rice and Ben Pollard. I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program, and Stan is a retired NRCS person, and Ben is a retiree of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. And we are in Woodward, Oklahoma, to speak with Tom Lucas, a USDA/NRCS retiree, regarding your work in the area of conservation. Let's see if I get this right. During your career with the USDA, which started in 1998 and retired in January of 2015, served as the coordinator of the High Plains RC&D out of Buffalo, Oklahoma, and then as public affairs officer at the state's NRCS office in Stillwater. Lifetime farmer and rancher in Woodward and Harper counties, and nationally known public speaker, and has been called Oklahoma's second Will Rogers. Received an Emmy Award, the Governor's Award for Community Service, and was twice named honorary lieutenant governor of Oklahoma by two different lieutenant governors. This is going to be part of our Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, which is a collaboration between the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. So thank you for talking with us today.
Thank you.
Before we get into conservation, let's learn a little bit about you. Start wherever you want.
My name's Tom Lucas. I was born in 1946 in Moreland, Oklahoma. I spent my early years growing up in northern Oklahoma County, northern Woodward County, just a couple of miles south of where the Cimarron and the Buffalo Rivers run in together, and that's a huge salt flat. And we lived in the house that we lived in was the old Pea Ridge Schoolhouse. And the Pea Ridge Schoolhouse was originally on the south side of the bank of the Cimarron River, west of Freedom. And in the 1920s, my dad and granddad skidded that schoolhouse 7 miles to our place, and they set the house up. And after about 6 months, Granddad didn't like where it was, so they skidded it down the hill a half a mile down by the creek, and they added on a room for the kitchen and dining room, and then a utility room on the other end of the schoolhouse. And so that was where I grew up, was in the old Pea Ridge Schoolhouse. And we didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. Of course, no telephone or anything like that. And I think I was in the second grade. And in those days, the Rural Electric Cooperative was bringing power out to the people who lived in the country. And it was headed our way, and every day we could see that it was getting closer as they set the poles for the electric line. And I come home from school one evening, and they were just finishing up. And what they did is, in each room in your house, they put a light and a switch and one plug-in. You didn't need the plug-in yet because no one had any electric gadgets yet to use. And I'll never forget my mother. She was so thrilled by the electricity that first evening she would go over to the door and turn the switch on and go, "Oh my." And it was just an unbelievable thing that we had electricity. So that was one of the big events in our life, I guess, was getting electricity in the house.
Did they supply the bulb?
They did.
Okay.
When they left, you had a light in each room, a light switch, and a plug-in somewhere in the room.
So what was the first appliance she bought?
I think it was a toaster. I
Okay.
think a toaster was what I recall was the first thing that she bought.
Okay.
We how we lived is we milked 10 to 12 cows by hand, and these weren't dairy cows. We didn't have dairy cows. We just had some old beef cows that gave quite a bit of milk, and so we broke those to milk. So we milked 10 or 12 cows morning and night by hand, and we separated the cream. It was a Daily Val cream separator, and you poured the milk in the top. It had a big bowl, stainless steel bowl, and it separated the milk from the cream. And you caught the cream in 5 and 10 gallon cream cans, and we kept it cool inside of what the milk house was right by the windmill. You saw the picture of the old windmill a minute ago, and the water, we'd run cool water out of the windmill into that concrete tank, and we kept the cream in there to keep it cool until we could sell it. So on Saturdays, we would take the cream and eggs to town, which was Woodward and we would sell the cream and eggs. And it seems like it was somewhere between $7 and $10 a week was the amount of money we got for the cream. And we would buy some groceries, and we always bought a sack or two of feed. And then when we would leave town to go back home, everybody carried a set of ice tongs in their vehicle. And on the north side of Woodward, there was an ice plant. And the last thing you did before you went home is you put a nickel in the slot at the ice plant and gave you a 50-pound block of ice. And you set that in your vehicle and covered it with a gunny sack to keep it from melting. And it's an ice box. I still call our refrigerator the ice box. And you set that block of ice in your ice box, and it kept whatever you had bought cool until it ran out. And usually you had till about Wednesday to eat everything that you bought at the store, which seemed like to me lunch meat was one of the main things that we bought. We ate a lot of sandwiches, I think, and but you had until Wednesday to eat it before we lost all the ice in the ice box. But it was I don't remember ever wanting for anything, and we were never hungry. So Mom was a great cook, and occasionally we would maybe get us some peaches in the summertime, and she would make whipped cream from real cream. And I didn't care that much about the peaches. I'd just take the bowl of whipped cream and eat it. It was that good. But the money that we got off of the cream and eggs, that was our cash flow, so to speak. And in about 1959 or 60, right around in there, the government decided in order to sell cream, you had to have a grade A dairy. Well, most all of our neighbors, I mean, we all lived kind of about the same way. Everybody milked cows. And so when they said you can't sell your cream anymore, then that became a crisis, because that was how we ate, really, our cash flow. I mean, we had things we raised, but so we had to do something else. And what ended up, my dad became the night policeman at Buffalo, and he would, and so we rented a house in Buffalo and we moved to Buffalo. And then Dad would work the night shift as a Buffalo policeman, and then he'd sleep for 2 or 3 hours and go to the farm, and it was pretty hard on him. And we, in the summertime when school was out, then as a freshman, I went to Buffalo School and graduated from Buffalo High School. The grade school was at Freedom, with a couple of years in Woodward when Mom worked at the clothing manufacturing plant here. And so we stayed with Granddad and Grandma, who lived in Woodward. And so I went 2 years, first grade and fifth grade, I think, I went to Woodward. And then the rest was at Freedom and then high school in Buffalo. But we, when school was out, we would spend the summer at the farm and then go back to Buffalo. But that was kind of our way of life, and our neighbors lived about the same way. And when you had to put in a grade A dairy, not very many people could afford to do that. So that changed the dynamics, and people started moving to town and trying to maintain the farm while they were working in town. And so things began to change, when they put the grade A dairy.
What year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 64.
64. And what were your plans at that point?
Well, I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to go to OSU. At that time, and I wasn't a good enough student to get one anyway, but there were no scholarships, there were no loan programs. So you had to figure out how you were gonna make it, and it was tuition at that time was $7 an hour, and if you had $1,000, you could make it the whole year in school. That would be your tuition, your books, your room and board, everything. If you had $1,000, you could make the year. And so Mom and Dad kind of worked themselves to death trying to get me through. And I went north to Harvest 2 years and made probably about a third of what I needed to get through the year. And Mom had 2 jobs, and Dad had 2 jobs. Counting the farm was a job, and then he had another job. So I'll always be grateful.
So why OSU? Because it was agriculture?
It was agriculture, and I was interested in becoming a VOAC teacher at that time.
Okay. Had you had one in high school that you liked?
Yes, I had 2. Had one at Buffalo. I actually started my freshman year at Freedom, and about 9 weeks into the year is when we moved to Buffalo. So I had two teachers that were OSU graduates, and they were an important part.
So did you graduate from OSU in 1960?
I graduated in 68.
68, okay.
Then by then I was ready to be a professional student, I guess. I went to work at as assistant director of student activities for OSU while I was working on my master's, and I got paid $250 a month. So I could kind of make that work, and that was more money than I'd ever made. and the assistant director of student activities. You work with the student organizations, but one of the main things you do is carry the cheerleaders and the Pistol Pete head to all of the away football games. And they would send me, I would go over to the motor pool, and they would check me out a station wagon, and the head was heavy. I mean, it was pretty heavy. It was, I don't know, plaster, I guess, is what it was made out of. And so I would pick the cheerleaders up, and we'd load the Pistol Pete head, and we would head to the ball game, wherever it was. So I got to visit all the other schools, and that was, I worried about that. I didn't like driving with a load of kids. I mean, I worried about being safe with them, and the university would give them so much money to eat on during the trip. We were not allowed to stay overnight anywhere. So the worst one I remember was University of Missouri at Columbia, and that was a long night and day to go over and to that ball game and then come back. That was the farthest one that we went. The rest of them we were able to come and go mostly in the daylight hours, but
And that was before seatbelts, probably.
it was. Seat belts hadn't been invented, and I did that for the first year or so, and Dr. Francis Tuttle, who was head of vocational and technical education, somehow I'd gotten acquainted with Dr. Tuttle, and excuse me, he hired me to write what they called a core curriculum for vocational agriculture. They were trying to standardize what the freshman vocational agriculture students were receiving. So he hired me to write that curriculum, and I couldn't even spell curriculum, at that time. But anyway, later, after I finished my master's, I went to, I was in the Army Reserve. I went through the ROTC program, and so I did my active duty, and then when I got out, Dr. Tuttle hired me back to the state of Oklahoma. Had a program called Special Schools, and it was part of the Oklahoma's industrial development effort. And what we would do, Dewey Bartlett was governor, and he was a big promoter of bringing in industry to Oklahoma. And we would, well, I'll give you an example. There's an air conditioning plant north of Norman. It employed initially 1,400 people. And what we would do when we had an industry coming, we would go visit wherever their plant was that they were making it like. And so we would set up a training facility to train people to go to work in that plant, so that when the construction was completed, then we had X number of people ready to go right to work in that plant. And we'd set up assembly lines. And so I had, there was 3 of us in that division, and there was a lot of things starting to happen in Oklahoma, particularly because of the push to get industry. And so I had 22 of those schools that I was kind of taking care of. That didn't mean you had to be there, but you had to find an instructor, you had to get it set up. And so that was part of the state's industrial development effort. And somewhere along the way, Dr. Tuttle recognized the need to have a legislative liaison to kind of work with the legislature and others. So I became the first legislative liaison for Dr. Tuttle and the State Department of Vocational Technical Education, and that was a thrill. I didn't know hardly what I was doing, but Dr. Tuttle, whenever he would receive a call from our legislator, why, he would send me, and his instructions were, do what you have to. He said, I know you won't commit us to something we can't do or we can't pay for, so take care of it.
Well, a lot of responsibility.
And so that was very interesting. One of the very first ones, Senator Gilmer Capps, Sam from Mountain Park down in there, Snyder. Senator Capps, at that time, there was a lot of people in his area, Mountain Park and Snyder, that were custom cutters and custom wheat cutters, harvesters. And they were having a problem getting kids people trained to go north to harvest with them. And so I go talk to Senator Capps, and he explains, he said, can you have a school to train the young people how to operate combines and trucks? And I said, sure. And so what we ended up doing, there was I hired a ag instructor by the name of Clyde Pollard. He was a retired vocational agriculture teacher, and he hired him to be the teacher for this. And so we had an initial meeting at Snyder in the school gymnasium, and there was standing room only for this meeting. And I can't tell you how many young people showed up for the training, but it was a lot. And we went through the training, and then the farmers brought their combines and their trucks and their tractors in, and we set up an obstacle course on the football field. And it got to be quite a thing. And Gomer and I decided that we should call it the Combine Operator Training School, which was COTS, COTS, because that's what they were going to be sleeping on when they went north to harvest. So anyway, that was an example of some of the things that I did as liaison to Dr. Tuttle. It was a good time.
And how long did you do that? A couple of years?
A couple of years, I think.
Well, then just take us on through. What after that?
Well, I came back to Woodward, and got a real estate and insurance license, and bought a small farm, 120 acres, I think it was. Anyway, the county treasurer got killed in a car accident. And so the commissioners, I didn't really apply for it. I was in the courthouse running records on something I was working on, and the chairman of the county commissioners came out, and he said, come in here a minute. And he said, we're going to appoint somebody to fill the treasurer's position. He said, would you be interested? And I said, I don't know. I don't think I can even spell treasurer. And so anyway, they had me come in and talk to all three of them. And so they appointed me county treasurer. And I ended up running, and after the appointment term was over, got reelected 6 years. So it was 2-year terms then. That was before they went to the 4-year terms. So that was interesting. That was interesting work, and I think that led to probably my first conservation effort, I guess might be the word. And I don't know exactly, I don't remember exactly how this happened. It may have started when I was working for Dr. Tuttle. But somehow I got to be friends with the Kerr family. And Bob Kerr Jr., the senator's son, he and I got to be good friends. And the Kerr Foundation, this was after a senator passed away, and the Kerr Foundation had established a nonprofit, and it was called Oklahoma Water, Inc. And it was to promote a statewide water plan for the use of water. And a major part of that, and I have the books over there, I was able to keep copies of those, but the idea was that we would, most of the lakes in eastern Oklahoma were built by then. And the plan was to transfer the water from eastern Oklahoma to western Oklahoma, either via a pipeline or a canal. And so Oklahoma Water, Inc., that's what that purpose was for. And so I ended up on the board, and Bob and I went all over the state and held meetings at each lake, and went over the details of the plan. And we also, at each of these meetings, we had some local people on the program. And we promoted, and we worked on that for 2 or 3 years. And that led to some meeting other people that were involved in water development and conservation at that time. And this was in the 1975 to 80 time frame is when this was happening. And we were unable to get the water plan approved by the legislature. And in fact, that's a different story, but we couldn't get it passed. And it was years later before Oklahoma ever did get a water plan passed. It was one of those things that was controversial, and it took years and years to get something passed. But at the same time, there was a lot of focus, and Ben, you'll remember the decline in the Ogallala water formation. The water table kept dropping every year due to the increased pumping for irrigation in the Panhandle. And so Congress passed a bill and appropriated $5 million to study the Ogallala and make recommendations to, preserve the water over a long period of time. And I ended up being appointed. They had a High Plains Water Council Advisory Committee, and I was appointed as one of the members of that. And it didn't have any real duties other than was able to keep informed of the progress of the study. And nothing really ever came out of it. They spent the $5 million, of course, which was a lot of money in that time period. And so, other than learning and knowledge, there was no real change come out of that study. So that's where we are. I do need to back up a little bit and go back to the farm. And I think I became aware of conservation growing up, but I didn't know what it was. And the house, the Pea Ridge schoolhouse that we lived in, that they had moved 7 miles and then moved down the hill, was beside the creek. Well, it was on just a little rise, the house, and when the drought broke in '57, we had a horrible time in the '50s of the drought. But when the drought broke in '57, every few days we would get 4 and 5 inch rains in a couple hours. And the creek would get out of its banks and the water would go around the house. And it never got in the house, but I remember we would take a stick and stick at the edge of the water so we could tell if it was coming up or going down. And I remember thinking, I wish we could catch this water and keep it so that we could use it in the dry times. And anyway, and that was kind of my early thought process as I began to think about things like that.
10 or 11 years old.
And Granddad and Dad, the field to the northwest of the house was had quite a slope to it, and I remember this number for some reason. They paid $284 to get the field up above the house terraced, and of course that helped keep some of the water that was coming down and held it on the field. But we had a concrete stock tank there close to the house, and it was 3 feet deep. And I looked at it not too long ago, and there's only this much of the concrete tank still showing, which all that's topsoil. There's almost 3 feet of topsoil that's come down the hill and has washed in there over time. So it's a significant. You don't think about that till you see something and you actually measure it with, and that's topsoil that's floated in there. But the '50s was just, we were 10 years past the Dust Bowl, and it wasn't as bad as the Dust Bowl, but it was pretty bad. And I remember seeing baby calves at the sale, $5, sell for $5. And as I got a little older, I was able to buy some calves for $17, and that was part of my first FFA project. As I worked for a neighbor, and I took my money and I bought 3 calves for $51, and kept those, and that was my first FFA project. So I had those 3 calves, but anyway, I guess that was kind of the first time I started thinking about things, about conservation things, about water.
How have they learned about terracing? Do you have any idea how?
Well, I do. The Soil Conservation Service by then there was some cost share programs, and they would pay part of the cost of doing that. And I think that there was a lot of terraces built in the '50s, and because of the drought, there was a lot of ponds built. And what we didn't realize is we built those ponds, and most of them silted in. And we should have built, not knowing at that time, we should have put silt dams up above them to, But anyway, at that time there was cost share money, and having been through the dry '50s, people were building ponds and terraces and everything. So that's kind of how that got started. But I remember it was on a Friday, and I was at school at Freedom, and we got one of those 5-inch rains on Friday morning. And when we got on the bus to go home, the water was all across the Cimarron River, lapping up underneath the bottom of the bridge. So they wouldn't go across the bridge. So they put us up. We stayed with friends in town that weekend, and nobody had a phone. I guess everybody knew we was probably all right, and so. But yeah, it was. We're accustomed today. Everybody's got a mobile phone and can call from just about anywhere. We didn't have that. We didn't have a phone, and we did get a radio. After we got electricity, we got a radio, and we'd listen to the weather and Gunsmoke on either Saturday or Sunday evening. Gunsmoke was on the radio, and we didn't get a TV till we had moved to Buffalo, and I think I was a sophomore when we got a TV. And that was a great thing. We got 3 channels, but TVs first came out, and the neighbors to the north of us, they had a TV, and a long 60-foot tall antenna that tried to blow over every time we had a strong wind. And Mom and Dad, we would go up there on Saturday nights, and they would play cards, and at 10:30, everything quit to watch the wrestling matches. The wrestling matches came on at 10:30. Well, all it was was snow. And every once in a while, you might be able to see kind of a dark shadow in there. And it never failed. Whenever that happened, somebody would say, "Boy, it's playing tonight, ain't it?" And anyway, it was several years before we got anything but snow on the TVs. But when we got the TV in Buffalo, that was on a cable, so we had a little better picture. But there was only 3 channels that we could get.
And TV probably came after a refrigerator.
Oh, yes.
Refrigerator
Yes.
was one of the first things.
Yes. The refrigerator took some time because they had to save up some money to get it, and I don't remember.
Tom, tell us about that little tractor out there, little 8M Ford.
Okay. Dad bought a new in 1949. He bought an 8N Ford tractor, and it's about a 23, 24 horsepower tractor. And he had all the implements: the cultivator, moldboard, lister, and a little third of a yard bucket that you could put on behind it. It had a 3-point hitch. And when I was, I don't know, 9 or 10, Dad he hired me out with the Ford tractor and the cultivator, and I would cultivate the neighbors' row crops, milo or whatever. And so that tractor's been a part of my life, and I still have it. It still runs, and could use some paint, but it's still it's a nice tractor, and it's been a part of my life the whole way.
If he hired you out, did you get the money or some of it?
No. But I didn't worry. If I needed something, he got it. So
I get the impression you were an only child.
I was the only child. When I was about 8 years old, mother lost a second baby, and prematurely, and so I ended up being all they had.
And he was able to buy this equipment because he worked off the farm. He had the job as a police officer.
Well, actually, the farm was profitable right after the war. because you could plant fence to fence, and wheat was a great price, and he made enough money to buy that tractor, and then he bought the tractor in '49, and then around '52 or so is when the drought hit, and we didn't raise anything for 3 or 4 years. I mean, nearly nothing. And so by then, excuse me, whatever reserve he had was exhausted, by that time too. But we had Johnson grass. We had some bottoms on that creek that in a dry year, you can grow Johnson grass on those bottoms. Well, Dad knew when to harvest that Johnson grass, so that was our hay. And we would mow that Johnson grass. We had a mower for the little tractor and a rake. And then we'd rake the Johnson grass hay, and we'd pick it up and stack it. And one year the grasshoppers were so bad that when you went in of a night, you took your pitchfork handle and you stuck it inside of the stack, because if you didn't, you'd come out and your pitchfork handle would be just covered with grasshoppers, and they would have pitted your pitchfork handle, trying to eat the salt, from sweat from your hands. And they would just cover, the fence posts were just covered with grasshoppers, and they would move as the sun moved the shady side of the fence post. The grasshoppers would move on the shady side, and they'd just move around the post.
Wow.
But I mean, they were everywhere. It was just grasshoppers everywhere.
How does a conservationist respond to that?
I don't know.
Get chickens?
We had chickens, and they got their share. There was a product called Paris Green that you mixed up with some bran, and you just walked around and you threw it out, and it would kill the grasshoppers. Can't buy it anymore. It's the most effective thing I ever heard. And anyway, well, I went backwards, and now I don't know where I was.
The High Plains.
Oh, I need to tell you about the Corporation Commission.
Yeah. Water seems to be a pattern a theme here, so.
Yeah, it does. I had been county treasurer for about 6 years, and the Oklahoma Corporation Commission had the oil and gas. They're the regulatory agency, as you know, and their oil and gas division was the regulatory agency for oil and gas drilling and operations and production. And they had done a management study, and so I was hired by the Corporation Commission to become Director of Oil and Gas Conservation. Excuse me. And implement that management study. And there was a lot of issues at that time with the commission. It had been the rules hadn't been enforced fairly to everyone. We had issues with saltwater disposal all over the state, and there wasn't enough places to get rid of the salt water. But we instituted some significant changes. The commission is charged with the protection of fresh water from oil and gas drilling and operations. the standard rule was that a company would file an intent to drill, and then the commission would prescribe the surface casing. So let's say we had an application for somebody to drill an oil and gas well, and we determined that the depth of the fresh water was 500 feet. So the rule was we had to set it at least 100 feet below the depth of the known fresh water. So we would tell them, you've got to set your surface casing 600 feet in order to protect the fresh water. So that was the rule that we lived by. And I was there during the real oil boom, and they started drilling a lot of deep holes, particularly in southwest Oklahoma, down around Elk City, and even down Fletcher, 20, 30,000 foot holes. And so I'm sitting in the office one day, and this guy come in, and he's got this gallon jar full of water and cottonseed hulls and drilling fluid. And he said, I just sprayed my peanuts with this. And the following day, I had another guy come in with his gallon of drilling fluid. And what had happened is, in this case, I think the base of the fresh water was around 650 feet, so we prescribed 750 feet. Well, keep in mind, they're going to drill 20-some thousand feet. So they set their surface casing, and they're going way on down before they set their second string of pipe. So what was happening is, in the process of drilling on down, we were losing. They were putting drilling fluid in, and it was coming back up because we didn't have the surface casing set deep enough. So we ended up having to, there was 30 operators that this affected. We ended up having to, in a lot of cases, we prescribed 10,000 feet of surface casing, which all of them are pretty willing to cooperate, even though it costs a lot of money to do that. But without that, there wasn't any way to keep drilling fluid from getting in the fresh water. So that was, and so we were able to change that. And another thing that I did, there was they used bentonite a lot in the drilling and to seal off the pits and stuff. And bentonite was not a harmful thing to put on the soil. So we had a lot of scars on the land, particularly in eastern Oklahoma, where old oil and gas operations, they left bad places in the land. So I approved spreading a bentonite on those scars on the land, and that led to some use of it, and they called it soil farming. But that was a good thing. It healed up some places that were pretty bad. We were able to put that down and stop the erosion, and that was a good thing. The other thing that and today, I think in the end it's turned out it might not have been the best thing to do, but we didn't have enough disposal places with the amount of drilling that was going on. At the time I was there, it reached 987 rigs in Oklahoma, which since then nationwide it's never been that. And so we had all kinds of problems that you might imagine just by the sheer volume of the oil and gas industry. And we had people, truckers would just go down the road and open the valve on their truck and just drive down the road and dump the salt water. And so I applied to EPA to give Oklahoma primacy over underground injection. What that meant was we could approve our own saltwater disposal wells without having to go through EPA. And it got approved, and we were the first state in the nation to have primacy over underground injection. And so we permitted, I think ultimately about 70 disposal wells. And I had some rules that, one is we didn't want an oil and gas operator to own a disposal well. Then we also did not want them to be too close together and compete with one another, because you get too many and then you got more other kinds of problems. And so it worked. It began to solve the problem with disposal of salt water. Today, I'm not sure it's been good, because with all the drilling we've had and the horizontal drilling, they permitted saltwater disposal wells without much of an analysis. They just issue the salt, and they allow the companies to own them. I don't think that's good. I don't think it's been good for our environment. I think down the road, I think they've permitted over 200,000 disposal wells in the state. And I think, as I look back, I think, well, I was kind of responsible for us to be able to approve our own, but I think now it went past what it should be. So as we have these earthquakes and these kind of things, I hope we don't see problems with the fresh water. I'm afraid we will, but I hope not. But anyway, that was an interesting experience. It was serving 3 bosses who didn't always agree on what you ought to do. But I do need to tell you one story here out of this, that Hamp Baker was chairman of the Corporation Commission at the time. Hamp was from down around Loco, down in that area, and around Duncan, east of Duncan. And Hamp, when he first ran, he had old car hoods that he would hang on a tree with a hand-painted Hamp Baker says, "Drive with care." These were all over the state. People were saying, "Who is Hamp Baker?" You know, and he was preparing himself to run for corporation commissioner. Well, he had these car hoods. I mean, they were everywhere. You remember, Ben? And I'm sitting in Hamp's office one day, and one of his trucking buddies called him, and Hamp had the speaker on his phone. And this guy says, "Hamp," he said, "I need a car hood for a 1952 Studebaker." Hamp says, "Just a minute." He pulls out this drawer and he takes a folder out. By this time, I'm starting to laugh. He said, "There's one 9 miles south of Bartlesville on Highway such and such." He said, "It's on the west side of the road." He said, "It may have fell off the tree by now." This guy says, "How much you want for it?" He said, $20. He said, "If I can find it, I'll send you $20. Anyway, by then I'm almost on the floor laughing. And I said, "Hamp, how many of those have you sold?" And he said, "Oh, a couple of hundred of them." But he knew, he had mapped it. He knew where every one of them was and what it was. And anyway, he was an unusual character, and he was chairman of the commission when I was there, and had a lot of interesting laughs from Hamp and some of the things that he'd done in his life. But anyway.
At least he knew where to go back and get all of them after it was
He
all
did.
said
He
and
knew
done.
exactly where they were.
Well, hopefully he did.
He knew exactly where they were. But anyway, it was a unique campaign strategy that worked for him.
Were you living in Oklahoma City at the time, or could you do that from here?
I would go down on early Monday morning, come back on Friday evening, and it was I had 152 people on the staff. I had 4 field offices, and it was a challenge managing the organization. Yeah.
And how long did you do that?
A little over a year. I was hard to implement that management study, and when I got that done, I was tired and ready to do something else. Right off the bat, I had not been there 30 days, and they did a legislative audit on the Corporation Commission, and so right off the bat. I was looking at a legislative audit, which it turned out okay. I didn't have any problems really with that. But, anyway, I could tell you some funny stories about that, but I probably shouldn't. So, but anyway, after that, I came back to Woodward, and I worked for a drilling company here in town. And during this time, I was elected as chairman of the National Association of Royalty Owners, and that was a good experience. That was a 2-year volunteer. Volunteer. They were based in Pauls Valley, and we were successful, and there was a lot of issues. There was a windfall profits tax on oil that had been passed by the Congress, and we had a 1 barrel a day exemption for royalty owners from that windfall profits tax, and we succeeded in getting a 3 barrel a day exemption, and worked that through the Congress, and I got the experience of lobbying at the Congress, testifying at different hearings. And then the second thing, Congress had introduced a bill to freeze the price of natural gas. Well, that was harmful to the royalty owners and oil and gas producers. But in the end, it's harmful to the consumers, because if you put a price freeze on something, then it creates a shortage. And then in order to get the supply back, you have to increase the price. So we succeeded in stopping that in committee, and was able to keep it from coming out of committee. But the interesting thing, Jim Stafford was the executive director of NAGRO. He served as the first president, and then I served as the second president. And Jim Stafford was press secretary to Joan Crawford, and then later was undersecretary of transportation when Watergate was going on with Nixon, and he was wise enough to resign from that before all the stuff came out. Of course, he didn't have anything to do with it. But Jim, he was brilliant on figuring out how to get things done. And the thing that on getting the windfall profits tax exemption for royalty owners increased, the represented Harlem in New York City, Rendell, anyway, well-known congressman. He just passed away not too many years ago. Anyway, the Republicans had tried to beat, well, my name calling is not good today, but they had tried to beat the person was Speaker of the House who was a Democrat from Tennessee or somewhere. And they didn't succeed, so the Democrats had it in for the Republicans, and so they appointed this congressman to head up the taxation subcommittee on taxation of oil and gas. Well, Jim Stafford somehow found a man in Harlem who was a royalty owner, and he got a little royalty check. And he was 70-some years old. We brought him to Washington, and we spent a couple of days training him how to testify. And so we set one of the congressman's own constituents in front of him to testify about the effect of the oil and gas, the oil windfall profits tax. Anyway, we won, and we got what we were seeking. But that was a good experience. So anyway, where are we?
After the royalty.
Okay. Then in '98, why don't we stop for just a minute here?
Yeah, we can start.
Let me get a drink of water. In about 1998, I became coordinator for the High Plains Resource Conservation and Development Council.
How did that come about?
Well, at that time I was I was helping Dad at home. My mother had Alzheimer's, and we kept her at home, and so I was working at Buffalo as the economic development person for the town of Buffalo, and the High Plains RC&D. Those are federally authorized areas, and this one was 8 counties. They had never been federally authorized or funded. And so the council at that time, which is it's a nonprofit, they received some money from NRCS to hire a part-time coordinator. So I was the part-time coordinator. I did that together with the Buffalo Economic Development, and so I did that on a contract for a couple of years, and we were able to. Stan had actually been the coordinator. They had loaned him. Stan was covering the area, and anyways, I worked on a contract for a couple of years while we resubmitted the application to be federally authorized, and finally made it, and then they did. After that, they had funding then to hire coordinators, so I ended up going to work for NRCS to be the full-time coordinator at that point.
1990.
That was 2000, I think, is when I went on federal staff, and Stan Rice has been my mentor all along through this, and at that time there was the Fish and Wildlife Service had started proceedings to list the lesser prairie chicken as an endangered species. And Stan come by the office one day and he said, "You're not paying attention." He said, "You need to get involved with this lesser prairie chicken potential listing." And he said, this is regulation that had come on the producers that would not be necessarily good in their best interest. So we went to, Stan took me to Guyman, and we had a meeting with all the regulatory people that were supporting the listing. And where it comes in, Tanya, is when you list something like the chicken, the Fish and Wildlife Service can come in and tell you how many cattle you can run on your place, and they can tell you all these things that may or may not fit in with how you operate your property. So we had a meeting, and being a dumb old country boy and not knowing a lot of things, I suggested let's have a big meeting with the landowners and see what it would take to get this thing stopped. And they were like, "You want us to talk to landowners?" I mean, it was almost like they were scared to do that. And so we suggested, let's have a ranch conversation and get all the stakeholders together and talk this out and see what we can do. And so they were scared of that, and we said we'll host it in Buffalo. Keep in mind, this is 5 states now we're talking about, because the historical area of the Lesser Prairie Chicken is the High Plains region, which is northwest Oklahoma, southwest Kansas, southeast Colorado, northeast New Mexico, and the Texas Panhandle. So we were talking about 5 states. And so anyway, it moved forward, and in January of '99, we had the first ranch conversation, and almost 300 people from 5 states. And we hired a professional moderator, facilitator of the meeting, because we didn't know what might happen. We did have a rule that no uniforms. If you were Fish and Wildlife Service, don't wear a uniform. We didn't want any uniforms in the building. And so it turned out to be a significant success. One of the ranchers from our area, Arnett area, stood up and he said, "Here's what it's going to take for us to help do this." And he said, really, it's money. But what evolved out of this was we want to try voluntary habitat management to increase the numbers of the prairie chicken in place of listing it. Give us a chance to see if we can do this. So the problem that we were facing was that under the Endangered Species Act, there's not money available to help recover a species till after it's listed as endangered. So that meant there was no money. So we went to Washington and got a group together, and we were determined to find money to improve habitat voluntarily without the listing. And we raised a lot of money from all kinds of agencies. And so we began to we did some cost share with farmers and ranchers. Then we did a lot of things like clearing cedar. We cleared a lot of acres of cedar, and we ended up having ranch conversations in each of the 5 states, and we all kind of worked at it together. And we actually began to make, I think, some progress. And this thing got national and international attention because it was the first time any group had tried to prevent a listing by doing voluntary habitat management. So it resulted in a couple of things. There's there's prairie grouse all over the world. They all look different. And there's an international association of professional prairie grouse scientists. There's about 160 of them worldwide. They have a meeting every 2 years. And the United States had tried to get that meeting for a bunch of years and didn't. And guess what? They decided to come to Woodward, Oklahoma for their every 2 year meeting and convention. And we had 160 some scientists here in the area for a whole week. And they presented their papers about how they were dealing with the prairie grouse in their area. I didn't understand most of the presentations, but it brought a lot of attention to this area and to the problem. But that was one thing. It's just it brought attention, and with attention comes money, and this kind of thing. And we just kept going.
National Geographic.
National Geographic was here, took a picture of the chicken, and it just kind of, and this was before computers for the most part. You know, the computers were just kind of, you could do email, I guess, a little bit, but I mean, it was getting a lot of attention, and so we ended up forming the High Plains. It was an economic development partnership. We realized out of this there were opportunities for tourism out of the prairie chicken. And so we had a 5-state partnership. And this was, we got named one of the national models for rural economic recovery by the Economic Development Administration. And out of $400,000 in seed money that they gave us, over the 5 states, in about 2 years, we added $400 million of new business and industry in the 5-state area, which was kind of significant.
Impressive. Yes.
Significant deal. So the prairie chicken got us, I guess it got us started, and I'd have never figured it out without Stan
Saying you need to pay
calling my
attention.
attention to it. You
What-
know,
So did you keep it off of the list? Did it?
we did, and they
you?
told us after we'd been into this about a year, they said, "Well, you've delayed the listing at least 10 years," and so it ended up being more than 10 years. But we had the Sutton Avian Research, Avian Research at Bartlesville. They're the ones that recovered the eagle. We got money for them to come here and do research, and they stayed here for what, Stan, 3 or 4 years, and did all kinds of research about the prairie chicken, and we were able to provide them with some trailer houses over in the Laverne area, and they had staff that stayed here. And out of all this, one of the things we come up with was wildlife education trailer, which is a truck with an exhibit in about wildlife that people could come and go. And so we didn't have money actually for that, but we were able to get a trailer we'd done this all at once. We got trailers for the Sutton Avian people to live in, and we got these from the Border Patrol. They were mobile homes that they didn't need anymore, so for $1 we could get them. And so one of these, of the three, one of these trailers was gonna be our wildlife education trailer. So, we raised enough money to get a guy to go get it. And we get down there and this thing it's huge. It's beyond all our imagination. It's one of those that costs $2 or $3 a mile to move it, you know. And so we realized we had to go ahead and take it, but we couldn't use it for the wildlife trailer. And so we were going to bring it to Canadian, Texas, which Canadian was one of our partners in this 5-state partnership. And so the problem was we were going to leave it Canadian until we figured out what to do with it. Only Canadian didn't allow mobile homes in town. And so here we are, and the thing had 2 or 3 breakdowns on the way. So that gave us a little more time to try to figure out. And lo and behold, we're on the outskirts of Canadian, and lightning hits the Canadian golf course clubhouse and burns it to the ground. The trailer went to the Canadian golf course and became their clubhouse. And we got out of that trap only to come up with another one in New Mexico that belonged to the Forest Service. And this one would work. And a couple of our council members, they go out there to get it. And it's a military, it was Corps of Engineers, it's camouflage and all this. And so it had a governor on it, it'd only go 40 miles an hour. And they were doing this in August, and the heat was terrible. Anyway, they get it to Canadian in the middle of the night, and they pull it up. The Industrial Development Office Canadian was on one of the main streets, main highway. So they just park this in front of their office on Main Street. They go on home. Well, people get up, coming to coffee early. They see this wildlife trailer. Well, it's a wildlife trailer to us. It's not to anybody else. Well, it's right after we had the shock and awe deal when we struck some foreign country over there, trying to get Osama bin Laden. The people coming to breakfast and coffee see that. They determine Canadian must be some strategic spot for the military. And by 10 o'clock, you know, all kinds of rumors about the military coming in to use Canadian for a military site went crazy. Anyway, we ultimately did get it made into a wildlife education trailer, but we had economic development can sometimes lead you in a lot of different directions. And in this case, it was a combination of conservation, improving habitat to save the prairie chicken that ended up resulting in economic development. And then
And a double-decker bus.
What?
And a double-decker bus.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about the bus. You know, the touring buses they have in England, the 2-story. One of the Fish and Wildlife guys was down at Tinker, and he spotted this touring bus. I mean, it was red. It was an English touring bus, and he said, "Do you want this?" And we were able, through our connections with Fish and Wildlife, we could get stuff before it became salvage. It was still usable. He said, "Do you want this bus?" And I said, yes. And I had to convince my council that we needed it. So we got this bus down there, and so we we send, we were gonna move it to the career tech out here, and they were gonna take care of it and have a place for it. And so they go down to get the bus and bring it back. And they get down there, and some young lad on the military base, they had been moving things around, and he took the forklift, he was gonna move the touring bus, and he run the forks through the transmission. So we have the touring bus, it's broke down, so we finally gather enough money to get it. It takes a large towing truck to move a bus like that. So we get it towed to Woodward, and they finally get the transmission fixed, and it's back mobile, but it was on compressed natural gas. The air base, they used this bus to take dignitaries around to the air base. So they were, they had spent $85,000 putting compressed natural gas in this bus. Well, the problem was it had a range of 85 miles. Well, there aren't many still yet today compressed natural gas stations in this area. So somebody wanted to take a tour, and they wanted the bus, so they take it, get it to a ranch west of Medicine Lodge, and they run out of fuel. Get it towed to Medicine Lodge, somehow get compressed natural gas, get fuel back in it. Then they run out of gas between there and Alva, and then towed in again to Alva. Then south of Alva, the bus breaks down, and it had to be towed to be fixed, and we finally gave up on ever being able to use it because it didn't have any range. You know, out here, 85 miles, you know, you can't even drive it to Guyman from here. So that was a escapade with the touring bus.
It was a live and learn experience.
It was. It was.
Plus the wind. It was pretty unstable in the wind.
Yeah. It was. I mean, it had the upper deck and everything. It was the real thing. Well, anyway, some of the other things then that we began to do, and keep in mind the purpose of the RC&D is to stabilize the small communities by economic development, utilization of natural resources properly for economic development. And part of the philosophy behind the legislation that created the RC&D was when we had the soil bank and then the CRP grass program in '86. These programs were utilized so significantly that it started hurting the small communities. We started seeing, and '86 was a big one because we harvested the wheat, and then people signed up in the CRP, and then in the fall, the fertilizer dealers weren't selling fertilizer. They weren't selling seed wheat. They weren't selling a lot of things. So we began to lose businesses. We began to lose the machinery dealers. They went pretty rapidly. And then we lose the grocery store, you know. And so part of the RC&D vision, at least for us, was to try to help keep the businesses viable in these small communities and help try to attract businesses back that they may have lost. And so we began to study about, you know, what we could do. And one of the things is the cedar trees that we have now over a lot of the state. The cedar trees have economic value, but they're also a hazardous fuel. They use our water, and it amounts to the fact that we're growing hazardous fuel using our water to grow an invasive species. And so we started undertaking and identified over 20 uses of eastern red cedar. And we had NRCS had the capability to map the cedar at that time. Dr. Jack Eckroat, who's passed away recently, was the expert on doing the mapping. So it took $7,500 a county to do the 18 counties. So High Plains RC&D raised that money to do the mapping. And it came from all kinds of places. It came from Department of Commerce. It came from State Department of Agriculture, School Land Commission. A lot of agencies gave money to, and we mapped the 18 counties with the largest concentrations of cedar. And if you're going to try to attract an industry, you got to know where your resource is. So that was helpful. And so we took, once we got these maps done, then we were able to start attracting an industry. And one of the ones that's been the best was a company in Indiana that was in the forestry business. And they came here, and we found a location for them at Stillwater. Stillwater had the highway connections they needed and the mounted cedar that was available to them. And so they they make it into mulch, and most of it goes to Walmart. And they've got a very good business. And anyway, within a year or so after these maps, we had statewide, we had added 70 new businesses with 200 jobs. And that's not a lot of jobs per business, 2 or 3. But you take these small towns, they get a new business, 2 or 3 jobs. That's a significant thing. So we were fortunate to be able to get those. And then High Plains RC&D was able to get some funding for an equipment pool where we could we had a wood chipper, different kinds of equipment that they could lease to a smaller emerging company so they didn't have to buy it, because the deal with a tree takes a lot of money to have equipment that'll handle a large tree. So they were able to help businesses get started by leasing them a piece of equipment that they needed for just a little bit so they didn't have to buy it. And that worked pretty well. But we did, I think conservation-wise, we did what I consider a significant project. We took, and keep in mind, we're here at Woodward. Right on the north side of Woodward is the North Canadian River. The North Canadian River runs into Canton, to the lake there, and then on to Oklahoma City, where it feeds into Lake OOHRP.
Mm-hmm.
So the water coming down the North Canadian is dedicated to Oklahoma City. It has been since the 1930s. So we were interested in trying to determine really how much water the cedars are using. And you see them along the river, but you also see them growing up on top of an old hill where they can't be getting a lot of water. So we've had a lot of controversy about how much water they're really using. But anyway, the High Plains RC&D put together a partnership of 27 agencies, including some private business, including the city of Oklahoma City. And we took 80 acres, and the Conservation Commission was one of our partners then. We took 80 acres, 3 miles north of where we're sitting today, 660 feet back from the river on each side for half a mile. It was 80 acres altogether. Okay, we cut all the cedars, and we got funding to do this with different kinds of grant funding. We cut the cedars on that 80 acres, and it was what we would call 90% canopy cover. You couldn't hardly walk through it. It was so dense. So we cut the trees, we let them lay for a little bit and dry, and then we chipped them with the chipper, and then we took them to a plant over at Moreland to be made into cedar fiber. And cedar fiber is, for lack of a better explanation, it's a large type sawdust that can be used in oil and gas drilling to control circulation. So now keep in mind, we've got 80 acres here. We've cleared them, we've turned it into cedar fiber. The cedar fiber off of those 80 acres brought $565,000. Then we had the scientists from Fort Reno, they're hydrology people. We were able to measure the change in stream flow before and after. And just that half a mile, 900 million gallons of water was the increase in water flow off of that half a mile from clearing those cedars. Okay, that at the time, Oklahoma City was using 100 million gallons of water a day, and that was represented 9 days of their water supply. Okay, Oklahoma City at that time, they did not realize the significance of, they knew the water they were getting from the North Canadian was a fraction of what it used to be. And they started buying equipment, and they're clearing, still yet today, they're clearing the properties that they have around Oklahoma City that have cedar around the lakes and some of those. But this was, it resulted in the OOHRP TV, public TV. They picked this project as a creative moment, and they ran stories on it 2 or 3 times a day for 60 days, I think it was. And then it ended up, they also produced a documentary on the new oil, which is water. And part of the focus of that documentary was this study that we did. And that was nominated for an Emmy. It didn't get one, but it was nominated. Unfortunately, as the RC&D was zeroed out in 2011, and a lot of those projects that were in progress, there's been nobody to pick up the ball and fish on them. There's nobody there to do it. So, you know, I hope someday they'll begin to clear the cedars on each, and it almost lines most from here to Oklahoma City. It lines the banks most of the way. The cedars do. So.
How do the banks of this 80 look today? The 80 acres you cleared, is it back?
The landowner did nothing, and
So
they're coming
they're
back.
back.
It's coming back. It's coming back. And he got that cleared, and I mean, it was a bottom land along the river. It was beautiful after we had it cleared, and but he didn't maintain it, and that's unfortunate. we considered that a significant project.
Yeah.
The NRCS had a program, it's called the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, EWP 216. And the purpose of that program is when you have a storm event and you have a road structure that's threatened because of that, like the ends of the bridge are washed out or something, the RC&D could initiate an application and together with the county commissioners or city, if that was the case. And what we would do is we would come in and stabilize that bridge by rocks. We might place rocks, and that way it saved the commissioners and the taxpayers from having to buy a new bridge. And we did 60 of those across the 8 counties, and we protected a lot of property. And those are good projects, and we utilized that program a lot. The program's still there, but it hasn't been used. The coordinators were the ones that initiated those, and not just me, but there's 9 of these RC&D districts, and so without the people that initiated those projects, there's been one done in 10 years since the RC&D program was zeroed out. We had another project. We got the 8 counties designated as a national biomass project area, and our idea was to be able to demonstrate that we could turn grass, cedar, we could gasify it, and particularly the cedar. We could gasify the cedar. And so we were able to do that on a limited basis. We know that we can do it. But in the process of doing this, we got involved with a little company at Buffalo, and they built a piece of equipment that would gasify cedar, but they were gasifying used tires. And that worked pretty well. It would, they could generate a huge stream of used tires, which that was getting rid of the tires. Anyway, that was a success. And the last I knew, Israel had been over here to look at that, and they were trying to buy it and move it to Israel to gasify their used tires. We just if something kind of made sense, we'd take after it to see if we could do anything with it. One of the things that we did is we kind of were the lead in getting the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association started. And we started that, and we had Dewey County, we had 3 or 4 of our counties had their own Prescribed Burn Association. And so we kind of pulled everybody together, and we called it the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association. And then it ended up, it was getting too big for us to try to keep funded and managed. So Noble Foundation, the last I knew, Noble Foundation had taken that over, and they're administering it.
And Tom, you might explain why prescribed burn is so important out in this country.
Okay, the way in nature, if we look back, how nature cleaned up the land, so to speak, was wildfires. And so over over time, we've suppressed wildfires. We've not wanted to burn anything. And as a result, we've got all these unwanted species out in, cedar being one of those. And so, by doing a prescribed burn, we can clean up some of that land and the grass and the desirable plants that we want to come back. And we've gotten rid of some undesirable plants as a result of doing that. So, it kind of became a shift in our thought process, rather than that fire is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the wildfires we had, yeah, but if you can burn an area that's covered with vegetation that you don't want and clean it up, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I read somewhere if you could time it correctly, it would help things like pollinators. If you could time it at the right time for like monarch butterflies.
I think that's true. I'm not smart enough to know about
No,
that.
that's all I know.
But it
I
is
just
a
read that.
benefit. It's
Yes.
a benefit.
Yeah, prescribed burns.
Ask me a question.
I'm thinking gophers.
Gophers.
Did you do anything with
No,
prairie dogs?
we
Prairie
didn't.
dogs or gophers? Prairie dogs, I guess.
we
Or
did-
if
we
you have
did.
prairie chickens, prairie dogs.
We do have prairie dogs. Are they endangered?
No,
I
they're
don't think
protected because the little guys that live with them, the burrowing owls and
Oh,
the
yeah.
black-footed ferret,
Yeah, that's right.
since they're the host.
We did quite a bit of work on carbon sequestration. In fact, we got access to a patent for calculating carbon sequestered from grass. And then we also, the Southern Great Plains Field Station here at Woodward, the research leader, Dr. Sims, at that time, he was able to get equipment to measure the carbon dioxide flux from grasslands at different ungrazed, grazed, overgrazed. He was able to measure the carbon dioxide flux. So we had quite a bit of information to be able to calculate carbon sequestered by grasslands.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was we were about 10 years ahead of our time because we weren't able to do anything with it because the government at that time hadn't progressed to the point that they were realizing that agriculture could sequester carbon. And so we have a lot of knowledge about it and done a lot of work on it, but we weren't able to turn it into money for anybody. And I think that's now changed.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of those things we did.
You started the foundation to think about it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, then, if you're through with that particular job, you can move into it when you were public
Okay.
affairs officer.
After they zeroed out the RC&D program in 2011, when they were doing the ag budget, it was always a big fight, and the RC&D program didn't come out favorable. So then that left nationwide, left 375 coordinators out there, and in Oklahoma was 9 of us. And most of them retired. I hadn't been with the agency long enough. I couldn't retire. So they didn't know what to do with me. And I refused to quit. So they said, well, go to Stillwater. So I go to Stillwater, and they didn't know what to do with me. And finally put me in a little cubicle that's no bigger than this table that we're sitting at. And I was to scan all 60-some hundred contracts that they have and put them in the database, put them in the right county so everybody could just pull them up on their computer. So for 2 or 3 months, that's all I did, is sit there at the scanner. I had 2 computer screens and a scanner, and anyway, I learned quite a bit about the things we were doing out of that. But anyway, I got that done, and then the big question was, what are they going to do with me next? And so finally, they decided I could be public affairs person, and so I had to learn how to spell that. Anyway, that proved to be pretty interesting, and I actually kind of liked that work. And I was able to do all the press releases on the new programs and initiatives that were coming out, and I was able to develop some friendships with some newspaper editors, and had pretty good success statewide in the stories that we worked on. And one of the things that I did, I had a good friend at the National Cowboy Heritage Museum, Don Reeves, who's the curator. And Don, he was working on a program. It's called Surviving the Elements, and it was about Dust Bowl and all kinds of things that we went through. And so he got some grant money to put that program together, and it was really neat exhibit, and then a series of lectures and all. And so he asked me to help him with that, and so I got to help. I got to work on that, and that was pretty fascinating. Got to know Don fairly well, and then got to kind of observe from afar some of the places that the Western Heritage Center was able to pull money from, and it was an educational experience, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to do that. But the other thing is, then Ben and I got in this project together. Ken Burns had done the documentary on lessons from the Dust Bowl, and that his documentaries go through the public television system. So that meant it would be the first showing would be on OOHRP TV, and so our what I call the Conservation Partnership, which is Conservation Commission, OECD, the NRCS, all the agencies that work on conservation. I refer to that as the Conservation Partnership. So the Conservation Partnership came together to work together with OEA to promote the lessons from the Dust Bowl documentary film. And one of the things that we did is we had meetings all around the state, and we invited the Dust Bowl survivors to come to that. We had a program. We had a short, like a 15-minute section of the documentary that we showed on film, and those were huge successes.
Mm-hmm.
We had 800 people or more attend these, and we had them all over. We started here at Woodward. We had one here at Woodward. That was, since I was from here, that was our test case to see if we could do it, and it did work. And anyway, the result of all of that was a lot of attention to conservation, a lot of attention to the agencies that were partnering in it, and it had 300,000 viewers. The first night it was shown on OETA, and that's the largest watched program in the history of OETA. And so that was a huge success. And that once we got over the initial shock of going through and figuring out what we had to do, then it got to be fun to do it. And it was a wonderful experience. We look back today at several of the folks in the film have you seen it? Several of those are now gone. We got to be friends with quite a few of them. And then, of course, the survivors that came to the program, a lot of them are gone. And so it was it was a rewarding experience. And the thing that we noticed was that, and as we talked about our families, just among us, we found that our families that went through the Dust Bowl were kind of reluctant to talk about it, you know, because it was a bad memory. Anyway, we noticed that after the program, the Dust Bowl survivors would get over here and they would really start talking to one another about their experiences. And I think that it was unorganized, and but I think that became a very important thing. Part of this program is the time that they got to share together, you know, and I wish we could have recorded that.
Yeah.
And part of that, and part of that work leads us into why we're here today, and that is Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society. And I've been passionate about history and oral history for a long time. And the very first project that we did when I became coordinator was we went to Kenton, Black Mesa, and recorded 30 hours of the elder stories. And then I've been on the museum board here at Woodward and involved in some other historical. But what's always concerned me is we're letting our history leave us without getting the information. And as I got a little older and realized the importance of knowing what happened before, then I'm so sad that I didn't get the stories from my grandparents. I didn't even know. I wasn't smart enough to know I needed to even ask them, you know. And so that has bothered me for a long time. And anyway, while I was at the state office, I started talking to some of our folks there, Larry Caldwell, and started talking about, we were calling it the Conservation Museum. And of course, as you might expect, most people said, you'll never be able to do that. And so anyway, as in my last year or so at Stillwater and then after, I took up a effort to go to each of the conservation partners, their board meetings, and make a pitch for, you know, doing this. And so, you know, they were generally everyone was favorable. And so I just kept working on it, and I was 3 years into it, I guess. Wayne Fyseth, you know, Wayne went around with me part of the time to these. I went to the Retired Employees Associations, and you know, everywhere I could go to talk about the need to preserve our history by talking to the people that lived this history. And finally, I guess I was to the verge of giving up. And in 2016, and at this, by now, Ben was on board with this, and Stan and some of the others. We had a meeting at the Rural Electric Association office over north of the zoo up there. And so that meeting really turned out to be the first real, we really got down to it and elected officers. Ben was elected chairman, which was the best thing that could have happened to us. And so out of that meeting, it started to move forward. And we had leadership, we had elected leadership. And so we began to start to do things. And I had been friends with Dr. Bob Blackburn at the Historical Society for a long time. And so I discussed this with him. And so he invited us over to the Historical Society. So we went over and met with him. And in essence, what he told us, he said, you need to be a 501c3, and he said, you need to be a historical society. And he said, if you will do that, then I will enter into an agreement with you that we will have an exhibit here, that if you will help us locate the artifacts, we will curate them and exhibit them and have a display and help us in other ways. So that began, that led then to an agreement with the Oklahoma Historical Society, which this opened up doors of being able to do a lot of things, to exhibit. They were very encouraging for the oral history and even offered to let us bring people there to the center. They no longer have an oral history ordinance, you know, that comes out. But that we could bring people there and they would do their oral histories. And so there was all kinds of support started to come out of that. And then NRCS saw the value of the oral histories. And so with Ben's work with NRCS and Larry Caldwell, the rest of the board members, they began to get some money to do oral histories. And so it began to take on life then. And I think as I look back, and there's a lot of things over time that I could put in the conservation that I've had some part in. I think probably being a part of this is probably the most important thing that I've been involved in. Because if we don't capture this history, it's gone. And we're losing it every day. And it's just so important that we get it. We don't know 10 or 15 years from now, if we don't do this now, there'll be so much about the things that we did, that we lived through, that we learned how to do, that nobody will know if we don't do this. So this is the most important thing, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate you, Tanya, for being willing to come out and take these oral histories.
It's been very enjoyable and enlightening.
Good.
So it's been a good experience.
Good.
And they're also helping with the digitization of 10,000,
Photographs.
which is a very good
That's a
thing.
major undertaking.
Yeah.
And that'll be made publicly accessible.
Yes, it's currently available on the Historical Society's website.
And the Historical Society gave us a small grant to do our strategic plan. So we have that done now. And we're in the process of getting the 501c3 nonprofit status. So
So plans for the next 5 to 10 years?
I think I kind of see, and this is just my vision, and I'm not on the board. I'm just hang around. But I'd like to see the big exhibit at the Oklahoma History Center. But I would like to see us, and we're being offered artifacts that people have. We're not quite ready to be able to take them, but we're gaining. But I would like to see display cases in the conservation offices as well as the local museums. And there's 7 regional museums, the larger ones, Enid's one of them. And I would like to see us have exhibits in those regional museums.
Yeah.
And so if we come together with the digitation of the photographs and we begin to have the exhibits available in these offices and these museums, because I think when we start to collect artifacts, we're going to get more than one of the same thing. So rather than say, okay, we'll take this one, you can do whatever you want to with that one. Well, no, we'll put this one in the History Center and we'll take these other 2 and we'll put them in one of the museums. So that, we'll keep those. And
Multiple copies keep stuff safe. Isn't that what it says?
and everywhere you go, somebody's got something. I remember when I talked to the Conservation Commission one time, there's somebody on your staff that stood up and said his family homesteaded where Lake Hefner is today, and he's got the plow that they used to break that out, and he said, y'all can have that. But he's got the plow that they used to break out the land where Lake Hefner is.
Well, you need the backstory from that. If you get the plow, you need to get him to tell you, record how he comes to have it.
And I think he mentioned that he pulled it out of the trash pile 2 or 3 times.
He would know that story too.
But anyhow, I've really been blessed with a good family and a lot of friends and close friendships, and it's the folks that are on that board and NRCS and Conservation Commission. It's like an extended family to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it seems like that's the case too. And I've got here in 2019 you were chair of the Oklahoma State Council on Aging.
yes,
That's quite a shift from.
well,
It's a resource, but it's not
yeah.
natural too, I guess.
I'm not sure how that happened. I had a friend that got invited to go to the session of the Oklahoma Silver-Haired Legislature. And Bonnie became a senator, and I ended up as Speaker of the House. And I didn't even know those people, and they didn't know me. As I think back, I think they were just looking for somebody that would do it. Anyway, and then out of that, there's an aging services division of Department of Human Services, and they have an advisory council at State Council on Aging. And so somehow I ended up as chairman of that group. And anyway, it's kind of with the change in state leadership, most of the aging services, what they do has been split out to other agencies. So that together with the COVID situation I don't really know where those are gonna end up now. They may not even be needed, but, yeah, that was, I mean, I didn't know much about all that, and particularly, I don't think I'm aging well anyway. And, you know, I just, I don't want to think about getting older. I just, you know, I'm trying to stay as active as I can, because, you know, there's still things to do. There's still things left to do. There's still things we need to do. This is one of them.
Mhm.
It's one of them.
And, we still, there's still a lot to do.
Well, when you look back over your career, what's your one or two highlights? What do you consider a couple of your highlights?
Oh, I think the experience of RC&D coordinator
Okay.
would probably be the biggest highlight. I think that I think we had success not because of me so much, but the council that came together. They were leaders. They were leaders in their local area, and their willingness to do projects and take responsibilities. I mean, we did over 200 projects, and everything from helping a company with electric cars to gasifying tires and all kinds of things. And you know, one person can't do all that. It takes all of them, and they were more than willing to tolerate my ideas, my crazy ideas, and they were successful because of those people who volunteered their time and gave part of their life to try to make their area
Mhm.
better. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to work with those people.
And you've been able to accomplish all this from Woodward,
Yeah.
or basically
Yeah, from
Moreland/Woodward.
Woodward, Buffalo,
This part of the state. Well, and you currently have a farm.
I do.
And how are the cedars on your farm?
I have one place that does not have any. The other one has some, and I've got to deal with that. So, you know, and I'm an example of somebody that hadn't done it well, but we'd be ahead if years ago in the wintertime you could see these little cedars this tall all across the pasture. All you had to do was take your pickup and an axe and you go cut them down, and in a half a day you could get a quarter section of cedar trees. If we'd have got them then, it wouldn't have been a problem.
Yeah.
But I remember what I thought. I mean, there's not a lot of trees out here. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm glad to have a tree.
Mhm.
And so that's why I didn't cut them when they were this tall. I try to now, but I didn't cut them because I wanted trees.
Well, and then does Woodward County have any watersheds? Flood structures?
No, wait a minute. That Laverne site's in Harper County.
Yeah, it's Harper
Yeah,
County.
the-
It's down in Woodward.
The flood control dam,
Mhm.
yeah.
There's none in Woodward County.
There's not, there should have been. There's a couple of places they should have put a flood control dam.
So what's the biggest issues in the county from a conservation standpoint today?
Well, I think it's still cedar trees. I'm not sure what the resource survey that the district does. I think the one a couple of years ago, a lot of the CRP grass came out and they were plowing it up and planting it, and now they're wanting to put it back to grass. So there was that was one of the issues was restoration of the grass. I still think that cedar trees, invasive species, is a big problem. And I think we're getting ready to see this come out. I think NRCS is moving toward let's get your woody species taken care of while they're this tall. So I think they've cut so many trees and it didn't solve the problem. I think they're going to step ahead. This whole cedar tree thing just keeps moving west. So I think they're going to step out and say, let's get rid of these before they become a problem and try to stop it there. So I think we're going to see some movement in that direction.
Bring in some goats.
Goats work.
Mhm.
And the place where I don't have cedar trees, my dad, both he and my grandfather were always willing to try something new. And so my dad, we didn't have a lot of land where we could have a lot of cattle. So Dad got into the Angora goat business. And he became the largest producer of Angora goats in the state. And as a result, we have no cedar trees on the place where he kept the most of them. But it was quite a thing. He had over 2,000 head, and the people from Langston, they do goat research. They would call him quite a bit and ask him questions. And he went, when he decided he wanted to try this, he went to down in Texas where they raised a lot of Angora goats, and he found a guy that was an expert in the hair business. And he went to Brownwood, Texas. There's a big warehouse where you take your hair, your Angora goat hair. And so Dad did his research, and he came out of that knowing the kind of hair that would sell the best. And so he used the warehouse owner and another guy that knew the goat business, and he started with 40 of the finest hair goats available, and then the rams, the billies. And so his herd came out of that. He never brought in anything else. It just kept growing. And he had the finest goat hair. And when you take your hair to the warehouse down there, your hair goes, they have bins and the hair buyers come and they do all the texture and all that kind of stuff. And Dad's hair was always the first that was sold. And there would be times they would call him and ask him when he was going to share because they needed his hair. And I've been down there. I mean, the warehouse is huge, and hundreds of people brought their hair in, and I've seen the hair sit there for a year or more at a time and not sell. But Dad's was not. That was not the case. They wanted his hair, and he made quite a reputation for himself. Just,
Had he gone to college?
no,
So he was self-taught.
10th grade. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm the only one in our family.
So he was a true goat farmer. You hear
He was.
that phrase some. So
He was, and
That's
he still had some cattle, but the goats were, well, how he made his money.
so what would be some of the issues with having those? I mean, too many would do something to the system or whatever. I don't
Well,
know if there is any.
Good fence, no cows.
Oh,
Yeah, your predators are somewhat of a problem, and the fence. You would think woven wire, what we used to call hog wire.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that would be the wire to keep them out, keep them in, but it wasn't. They would catch their horns in that.
Mm.
And so what Dad did, he had an 8-wire barbed wire fence, and the first 4 or 5 wires were about this far apart, and that kept them in. Yet it didn't catch their horns. When he first started, we had a half a mile of hog wire fence, and at the end of the day, that was the last thing we did. We went around and got the ones that were hung in the fence out.
Wow.
And so, anyway, he figured out the best way is just to do the barbed wire, space it close together where they couldn't get through it.
Maybe his extension worker helped him out some.
He might have.
Cooperative extension.
Might have. It.
The rule I've always heard that if the fence won't hold water, it won't hold goats.
But he pinned them up every night. They came in. He had pins, and it was amazing deal. You would have somehow he got started having a lot of twins. Well, a lot of the nannies can't raise 2, so that means in a little bit you got a bunch of them on the bottle. And I finally made him some racks where he could just, have 15 or so in a pen, and he could just put the bottles in the racks. But goats were not hard to raise. They're, a baby goat. They were easier to raise than a baby calf. And I don't know why, but anyway, the goats was, it was a big thing. And for a while, there was a price support on it, and the government would pay a certain amount on it. But for most of the time he had them, there was enough demand. There wasn't a need for a support price. But that was an enterprise that.
Goats work very well because they're browsers. They don't eat the grass. I mean, they'll eat the weeds and keep that down. And especially young trees, broadleaf trees anyway. So
we had a grove of honey locust, no, not black locust trees, and the goats would stand up on their hind legs and eat the leaves. And the trees at the place up there, the bottoms of the trees were all just level, about this high off the ground. They'd eat the leaves, and you could look under the trees. They just kept them. Looked pretty neat, really.
I know that was a roundabout way, but awful conservation. But it's part of the ecosystem, so I thought I would ask.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want him to talk about? Going once, going twice.
Covered the waterfront.
Okay.
Anything else you can think of?
Just that I thank you for doing this.
Well, my last
And,
question is then tell me, how do you want to be remembered? How do you want people to remember Tom Lucas?
I guess maybe that he left the world better than it was when he left. While I was here, he left it better than it was. The things that he worked on made things better. I would hope that. I would hope some lives may be better because of what we did. I guess that would be it.
I think mission accomplished,
Mhm.
right? Thank you for sharing with us today. It's been great.
Okay, thank you.